watching The Mystical Green Beanie.
Hey, what's going on, dudes and dudettes? I am the Mystical Green Beanie, and welcome back to another Spider-Man movie retrospective. And today, we're taking a look back at the second installment in the Sam Raimi trilogy, Spider-Man 2. Now again, I loved this movie as a kid. It blew my mind when I saw it in theaters. From the epic train fight to Peter's life just being relentlessly trashed, and the promise of seeing Harry Best Boy Osborn finally take his revenge on Spider-Man and take on the mantle of the Green Goblin, this movie had it all. But much like the previous film, you watch it again, and a lot of the movie just doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up. In fact, I don't know how it held up at the time, and that's not a superhero movie thing. That's just a film in general thing. But again, let's take a look at the characters and where they stand in this movie in relation to the previous film, and how they're handled and performed. And starting off with Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, he's still Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. He's not Spider-Man. Spider-Man is supposed to be lively and fun and charismatic and jovial, and Tobey's Spider-Man just feels lifeless and stocky. His Spider-Man feels more like a generic insert superhero archetype here type character as opposed to Spider-Man. And I think that's what a lot of people who critique the Raimi trilogy's lack of a jokey Spider-Man are really getting at. It's not that he doesn't tell jokes, it's that he just doesn't come alive as the character of the amazing, the spectacular, the sensational Spider-Man. So when he does tell jokes, like I said in my previous film review, they feel obligatory and stiff. And it's not that Maguire can't deliver quips or deliver a genuine Spidey performance. I've never actually played Spider-Man 2 because I never had a PS2, but I've seen the cutscenes of the game, and he does a decent enough job of feeling like Spider-Man there. So the best explanation that I can think of for as to why Tobey's Peter Parker is just so not Peter Parker is the direction in the script. But I've already said my piece on Tobey's Peter Parker in relation to comic book Peter Parker. As for this version of the character within the context of this film, he's still not great. In fact, he's kind of a pathetic dork who's weird and emotionally abusive. And to be fair, I do understand that the entire point of the film is, being Spider-Man's hard, and it's impossible to lead a double life. The only problem is, Peter is creepily fixated on this one chick who, if you might recall, he turned down at the end of the previous film. And to make matters worse, when she makes advancements towards him, he gives her these vague answers that a middle school boy who likes the idea of having a girlfriend, but afraid of commitment would give. And don't get me started on Peter's attitude towards MJ once he loses his powers and tries to get back with her after she announces that she's getting married. Not that she's totally innocent in this movie either, but we'll get to that bitch in a second. But no! It doesn't stop there, because then we get to the cafe scene, and this is the point of the film where I am flipping my shit and I'm screaming at my TV. What was the point then? Because in this scene, MJ straight up tells Peter that she's more than willing to leave her fiancé if Peter tells her that he loves her. And he says that he doesn't. And this scene plays very well on its own, kind of, but only in a movie where the two main leads are sympathetic characters and not emotionally manipulative monsters, one passive and the other active. But I'll talk more on that later. The other big problem that this movie has with Peter is that he's played as being too awkward. And as the saying goes,
everybody knows you never go full retard.
Peter Parker is awkward to the point where it is cringe-inducing sometimes. And my biggest problem with this movie is that Sam Raimi mistakes the early Ditko Peter Parker for being socially awkward, when in reality, he was more antisocial than anything else, which is a character flaw that will be corrected later on down the line. But we'll get there when we get there. But the thing about Peter's antisocial tendencies in the comics is that he eventually grows out of it. He doesn't stay that way. And that's the big problem, really, that this entire franchise has. Peter is a grown man who never outgrew his negative high school quirks. Then there's MJ. So I've said this before, but I'll say it again just in case you've forgotten. Mary Jane Watson is one of my personal favorite comic book characters of all time, And the thing that I love about MJ in the comics is that she is a damaged person who does her best to not allow her own personal misery and insecurities to get the best of her. Like, yeah, she had a traumatic childhood, but she always puts up this fiery redhead persona to act as a facade so that, in her mind, she doesn't burden others with her problems. And on top of that, she's a selfless, empathetic, compassionate human being. And Mary Jane Watson is none of these things in this film. Here she is a selfish, self-centered, manipulative monster. From the very beginning, when Peter and MJ are having that first conversation alone in their backyards, MJ is preying on the fragile emotions of this poor, pathetic man who may or may not have some form of undiagnosed autism. And when he doesn't give her the answer that she wants to hear from him, her first instinct is to hurt him by telling him that she has a boyfriend anyways.
What a bitch.
So later on at a party being thrown in John Jameson's honor, we find out that John is the man that she's dating and later on engaged to. And when she spots Peter in the crowd, she gives him this look that can be either one of two things. A, ugh, you. Like she's just disgusted by his very existence. Or B, yeah, I'm slurping down your boss's grandkids on a nightly basis. How does that make you feel? Peter? Yeah, it's definitely one of the two. Take your pick. Regardless, it's an awful scene, and it just illustrates how mean-spirited MJ is in this film. But then we get to the scene where she grills him for not showing up to her play. And look, I can certainly understand the frustration, and on top of that, the fact that Peter literally tries to win her back by reciting poetry, which is really weird, and seriously, what is wrong with Peter Parker in these movies? Whatever, I'm done talking about him at this point. But to be fair to Peter, he did have a legitimate excuse. Never mind the fact that he's secretly Spider-Man, which apparently MJ knew all along, which, if she did, makes her even worse within the context of this film, but I'll get there when I get there. Peter was caught in the middle of a car chase, and his scooter was run over. I'd say he gets a pass. But then you take into consideration that she might know that Peter is Spider-Man, then why is she busting his balls? Seriously, if you're fully aware, or at the very least, have a major suspicion that this guy is prioritizing the safety of innocent lives over your stupid fucking play, why are you giving him such a hard time? Like, on a fundamental human level, what is wrong with you? How self-centered must you be to get angry at someone for voluntarily putting their lives on the line to rescue others? But, moving on, there's this scene between her and poor John Jameson, where she tries to recreate the upside-down kiss from the first film in order to see who she likes kissing better. Peter Parker, who she kind of knows is Spider-Man, or John, her fiancé, whom she's getting married to. And then there's the cafe scene, which I've talked about already. It's awful, MJ's awful, Peter's awful, Doc Ock is awful for literally throwing a car into a coffee shop. Seriously, what if Peter wasn't Spider-Man? Both he and MJ would be dead, and your hostage plan would have failed. But I'll get to that issue soon. Anyways, after MJ does her job of being a good little hostage, she reveals to Peter that, deep down, she's always known that he was Spider-Man. Which, I've already ranted about. But, quick side tangent, this is an idea that I think works wonderfully if MJ is a sympathetic character who isn't dragging Peter through the mud. In fact, it's not even a matter of me thinking it works, I know it does. Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz play with the same idea in the comics, and you know what the difference is? It's actually written well, and MJ feels like a fully realized three-dimensional person, and not a love interest from Smallville. Oh yeah, and in the end she leaves John Jameson at the altar because she never really loved him in the first place, and he was just a rebound boyfriend because she really loves Peter. Loves. Who I also don't think she really loves. If anything, I feel like MJ wants Peter out of some weird sense of control, and Peter lets her walk all over him because she let him take a picture of her and smiled at him in the first movie. But, whatever. Next up is Harry Osborn, who is treated like a villain in this movie despite the fact that he's done nothing wrong? Seriously, look at it from his perspective. 2 years ago, their time, Spider-Man mysteriously sneaks into your house, holding your father's corpse, and when you ask him what happened, he freaks out and runs away. Suspicious much? And to make matters even worse, you find out that there's a connection between the man who may or may not have murdered your father in cold blood and your best friend whom your father pretty much loved more than you. Yet, Harry's the asshole. Yeah, no. If anything, cornball acting and scenery chewing dialogue aside, Harry is the most relatable and sympathetic character in this whole movie. He does nothing wrong. Well, he does conspire with a known supervillain and risk the lives of everyone, including his best friends, to get to Spider-Man. But wouldn't you? That was a test, by the way. If you answered yes, you're a fucking psychopath. But at the very least, I can understand how you could stoop to a place so low. Although I will say one major problem that I have with Harry's character comes in the end of the movie, and it's the scene where he discovers the Goblin's lair. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderfully acted scene, but how and why is Harry tripping balls? Like, I don't understand. It's not like he dropped acid or was shit-faced drunk at the moment, yet he starts having an argument with his father and conveniently throws a knife into the entrance of the Goblin's lair. Again, it's a great scene, but much like a lot of things in this movie, it makes no sense when you start to think about it. As for Otto Octavius, I will say, Alfred Molina does a damn fine job being as entertaining as he possibly can, and then some. Every scene he's in is just a pure joy to watch. My only real problem, and this isn't even an issue that I have with the film, but more so the choice in character establishment, Otto is very much played up like Dr. Kirk Connors, and he follows the general formula of the lizard, but, like, he doesn't turn himself into a lizard, it's more like the character formula, like, God, I suck at speaking sometimes. He's a mentor and a father figure to Peter, as well as a scientist, making he and Peter kindred spirits. But after the experiment goes wrong, he's driven insane and becomes a supervillain. And I don't really have a problem with that. The idea works very well, and I actually like the concept of Otto Octavius being a mentor to Peter before he becomes a hentai character. But I just don't understand why Sam Raimi made that creative choice when, in the same movie, he lays the groundwork for the lizard. And if you're gonna do that, I just don't understand why they wouldn't go the more traditional route with Otto Octavius, so that for the sake of a potential future film, you wouldn't run into a redundant situation. But all that aside, keeping in mind what is done with the character, I think it's a nice alteration. He certainly needs some tweaking, because once again, the script they're working with feels like it needed another revision, but I think the idea of Otto being a dark mirror for Peter in the sense that his life is great, but once he allows his hubris to get the better of him, he suffers the consequences by losing his wife, and his experiment gets shut down, kind of like how Peter chooses to look out for himself and only himself out of spite when he lets the mugger who killed his uncle run free. But the difference between the two is that once they reach those crossroads, Otto chooses the low road and acted selfishly, while Peter did the opposite, which is classic Spider-Man storytelling. But while there certainly is a responsibility message there, I think it's a little messy, because Otto starts to obsess over completing his experiment, which, to be fair, is almost beat for beat his motivation in his first appearance in the comics, but I think you can make this idea work a little better if it's made more explicit that he's as hellbent as he is, so that he can fulfill his duty to humanity, making the sacrifice of his wife not meaningless. And honestly, I think that works a little better than making it so that his arms are controlling him. But that's just my opinion, especially after playing the PS4 video game, where they really play up the whole Path to Hell is paved with good intentions theme, but bringing that game up in comparison to any of these 6 films almost feels like cheating, since it is the best Spider-Man narrative outside of the comics next to the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series. So, yeah. Aunt May is here once again, and she gets more to do finally, and I have a theory, because I actually believe that Aunt May figures out that Peter is Spider-Man in this movie. I mean, she obviously doesn't, since in the next installment she seems to not know, but the way her character arc progresses in this film makes me think otherwise. Because in the beginning of the film, during Peter's birthday party, when Spider-Man is mentioned, she quickly dismisses him, trying to change the subject, but after the bank fight between Spider-Man and Doc Ock, once Peter seemingly abandons her and Spider-Man mysteriously shows up and rescues her, she starts to change her tune. And once Spider-Man calls it quits, Aunt May delivers this less than subtle speech where she basically tells Peter to be Spider-Man again, and I gotta be honest, as much as I love the action and the visual effects and the web swinging in this movie, this scene has to be my favorite in the entire film. And again, like I said before, this all feels distinctly not Spider-Man-y, but in the way that these films approach the superhero archetype and using the character of Spider-Man, I think it works very well within the context of the narrative. Then there's J. Jonah Jameson, who is still one of the highlights of this franchise. He's still brilliant, he's still hilarious. There's even a scene that was cut from the theatrical release of the film, which was later put back in the extended version, where he dresses up as Spider-Man and is jumping around his office, and Robbie, Betty Brant, and Sam Raimi's brother, who plays Jonah's assistant guy? I think his name is Hoffman. But they're all just staring at him through the window, and it's hilarious. And again, not much to say on him, but J.K. Simmons is wonderful, and he continues to be the star of the show. As for the plot, it's better than the first films in the sense that it actually has one. So Peter's having a difficult time balancing his double life as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. His best friend is starting to resent him for taking pictures of the man whom he thinks killed his father, and he wants to build a life with MJ, but his being Spider-Man prevents that from happening. And on top of all that, his grades start slipping because he can't make his classes or study for exams, and the weight of being Spider-Man for 2 years has finally started to get to him. Meanwhile, Otto Octavius is building a renewable energy source for humanity, but the experiment backfires and he becomes Doc Ock. And all of these pieces come together pretty well on a narrative level. Kind of. So, the major problem that this movie has is that this is a character-driven film with characters who are either two-dimensional archetypes or unsympathetic soap opera teen drama caricatures. And it doesn't help that the two main leads are simply unlikable people, or at the very least, I found them unlikable. And one of the major arguments that people use in defending Peter and MJ's actions in this movie is that, well, love is complicated. And look, I get it. In fact, I think anybody and everybody more than understands this notion, because, in the words of Plateau, love is a serious mental disorder. It can make us do crazy things, but it doesn't give you the excuse to be a bad person. MJ starts dating John Jameson because she can't have Peter. And look, everyone has either had a rebound or been a rebound, but this is just a whole new level of fucked up. Because even after they announce their engagement, she indulges Peter and tells him to kiss her. And that's just not okay. It's not cute, it's not sympathetic, it's not romantic, it's fucked up is what it is. And Peter's no better. Once he loses his powers, he starts desperately trying to get with MJ. Not only is this incredibly cringe-inducing, but he does all of this while still knowing that MJ is engaged. And that's really the root of the problem with this film and the narrative's biggest mistake, the engagement of MJ and John Jameson. Now, maybe if they made it so that MJ was writing Peter off because she got sick of him playing with her emotions, then sure, that works perfectly fine. Plus, it's in keeping with MJ's character from the comics, and makes her feel a lot less like a thought. Plus, it also makes Peter come off as less of a pathetic fuckboy. But, as it is, they're just really toxic people, and you can't build a love story off of a toxic foundation. Also, Doc Ock, while I like what they were going for, they could have cleaned his character up a bit to make his character arc parallel Peter's a bit more. Because they do play with the idea of sacrificing what you want for the betterment of mankind, with him drowning the energy source once he comes to his senses. But again, it could have been a lot cooler if Otto was driven by his own sense of hubris and not mind-controlled by his arms. That way, when you get to the grand finale, where he finally accepts responsibility for his actions, his arc would have held a lot more weight, because it makes Otto more at fault for his crimes. Then there's just little stuff that's inconsistent with the larger narrative that could have worked, but weren't followed through on. Like when Peter tells Jameson in the beginning of the film that the Beagles turned the entire city against Spider-Man.
The lie detector determined that was a lie.
All throughout this movie, everybody is either cheering Spider-Man on or looking at him in pure amazement. Hell, during the train sequence, the citizens of New York stand up for him before Otto parts them like the Red Sea. Now look, I'm not trying to rewrite the movie here, but wouldn't it have been cool if throughout the film, Spider-Man continues to get lukewarm or backhanded reactions from the citizens of New York, really playing up the idea that Jameson has in fact turned the city against him? I mean, that's the idea behind the comic which this movie is pulling heavy inspiration from, which is Amazing Spider-Man issue 50. In fact, that's one of the major reasons why Peter stops becoming Spider-Man in the first place in that story. But after the scene with the burning building, learning of Aunt May's change of heart on Spider-Man, and MJ's abduction at the hands of Doc Ock, no pun intended, but wow, that actually worked pretty well. Peter leaps back into action as Spider-Man because he remembers that it's the right thing to do and that he shouldn't do it for anyone other than himself because this is his responsibility. And wouldn't that make the scene where everybody on the train stands up for Peter far more impactful because for the first time in forever, the citizens of New York are standing up for their hero? I think it would have. Moving on, I wanted to talk about the action sequences and the visual effects, and I gotta be honest here, I think this is the best looking live action Spider-Man film we've ever had. I mean, sure, some of the CGI doesn't hold up as well, but the scenes where Spider-Man is swinging through the city are absolutely stunning, and the entire train fight sequence looks better than a lot of superhero movies that we get today. The integration between CG and practical effects makes for a believable superhero spectacle that very few directors who work on these kinds of movies can pull off. But while the train fight gets a lot of love, I'd also like to point out the bank fight. Now, while I do think that it is a little dumb for a man as smart as Otto Octavius to rob a bank in the light of day, running the risk of encountering Spider-Man, it gives us an excuse for a very well choreographed and shot action set piece. But much like the scene that I mentioned earlier where Otto throws a car at Peter and MJ, it makes no sense. But it looks cool, so it's okay. And a lot of the action in this movie is like that. Like the train sequence where Peter stops the train. There were at least 2 other ways that Peter could have stopped that train and not tire himself out the way he did. But once again, the scene itself is dynamic and visually stunning, so who cares? Hell, even the scene where Spider-Man is falling out of the sky because he loses the ability to shoot his webs still look amazingly real. The visuals have held up remarkably well and show off the true talent of the visual effects team and Sam Raimi's direction. And finally, I wanted to talk about the costuming. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man costume, but I went into my reasons for as to why in my review for the first film. As for Dr. Octopus's costume, I really like it. It's how he was being drawn in the comics at the time, and maybe that was due to synergy purposes, but I honestly really like the version of the costume in the comics, and I feel the same way for the film. But yeah, guys, those are my thoughts on Spider-Man 2. Overall, I'm not really feeling it. And honestly, I don't know what I'm more excited to see. The like to dislike bar ratio or the comments in the comment section. Anyways, speaking of which, what are your thoughts on the film or my review on the film? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel, and if you want to see more content like this, all you have to do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thank you for watching, and as always, until next time, adios, nachos, adios.